Star Wars is one of the most influential movie series that started in May 1977, and it is still going strong today with movies, novels, comic books, video games, cartoon, and live action TV series. However, this is not always the case, and for a time in the late 1980s through, through the very 1990s, it seemed that the Force was no longer with the Star Wars franchise. The last movie of the original Star Wars trilogy, Return of the Jedi, was released on in May 1983, and the general feeling was that the movie portion of Star Wars was over and no more movies were going to be made to keep fans interested. There was the occasional Star Wars book, but these were uninspiring and did not make an impact. It seemed that no one was interested in Star Wars except for Star Wars role-playing game by West End Games. Parts of Lucas family of companies had to be sold off due to divorce of George and Marcia Lucas, including the next revolution of special effects, Pixar. Then the publishing arm of Lucasfilm sent out a request for new Star Wars novels to be published in the early 1990s. Betsy Mitchell, the editor of Bantam Books, heard about this and brought the concept to a writer she felt had the talent to write great characters and could compose scenarios in large-scale space opera-like Star Wars. That author was Timothy Zahn, a man many consider the savior of Star Wars. Let's go over a little history of Timothy Zahn so we can better understand the best-selling author. Timothy was born in 1951 in Chicago, Illinois, and spent most of his life in Lombard, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. He grew up reading books and adventures of Alistair MacLean, Isaac Asimov, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes. His favorite books were those referred to as heavily plotted. After high school, he went to Michigan State University and was working towards his doctorate in physics at the University of Illinois. While he was going to school, he also wrote and sold stories to supplement his income. Writing fiction and understanding of the science behind it inspired Timothy to start taking up writing full-time profession. According to the Chicago Tribune, he and his wife made an agreement that he could take a year off to write full-time, but he had to make at least $1,000. At the end of the year, he made $2,000. By the late 1980s, he had established himself as a respectable science fiction author. Going back to Lucasfilm request, Timothy had already been working on his next novel when Betsy called and came in to tell him to stop and strongly consider writing the next Star Wars novel series. Luckily, Timothy was given some leeway in what direction he wanted to go, and instead of writing, became happy during the time frame of the original Star Wars trilogies of movies. He looked to what Star Wars Galaxy would look like years after the event of Return of the Jedi, while still keeping the spirit of the movies. In 1991, the first hardcover printing of Heir to the Empire was released without much fanfare, and it was thought that like the early novels, it would have small sales. Lucasfilms were planning on 100,000 books in the first printing, but it called down 70,000 and even lowered the price about $7 lower than most hardcovers at $15 a copy. However, fans picked up the novel and was impressed that the story was more importantly with the main villain. Within a month, the first printing sold out and was neck to neck with John Grisham's The Firm, and in the New York Times bestseller list, something unheard of for a Star Wars novel. The success of Heir to the Empire was created to spark Star Wars fans that wasn't felt since Return of the Jedi in the theaters. Heir to the Empire takes place several years after the events of the Return of the Jedi. Darth Vader and the Emperor are dead, but the influence of the dark side lives on in the Emperor's hand, Mara Jade. The New Republic is still going through the growing pains of Imperial Center, now renamed back to Coruscant. Han and Leia are married and with children, and Luke is not the Jedi Master or teacher he thought he would be by now. And the scraps of the Empire are rallying with the new leader, Grand Admiral Thrawn. Unlike other cookie-cutter villains who seem to be bad for bad's sake, Thrawn led through loyalty and would allow those under him who could be taught to make mistakes while executing underlings who refused to think. His enemies were treated with respect, and he would have tactical advantage over their cultures by studying aspects of art, since it helps him with insight of how they think. Timothy completed the next two novels of this trilogy, each one making the New York Times bestseller list. Lucasfilm knew it would start something special, soon invited other authors to play in the Star Wars sandbox. These new novels became known as the expanded universe of Star Wars Legends. After the sale to Disney, Star Wars toys started selling again. Fans wanted more and more, coupled with the advance of computer-generated effects like in Jurassic Park. The Star Wars prequel movies were created since the loose connection of the movies and the books. George Lucas used Timothy Zahn's name in the Galactic Center of Coruscant in the prequel movies. Timothy wrote several more Star Wars novels over the next few years. Disney acquired Lucasfilm, which included Star Wars and Indiana Jones, and in a reported $6 billion transaction. As part of the transaction, Disney made the decision to clean the Star Wars house and only make movies and Clone Wars series as part of the official Star Wars story. This meant that the book that started the renaissance of Star Wars was no longer a real story and was relegated to legend status. Timothy was fine with this. He knew that anything he wrote for Star Wars becomes Star Wars property, and he was happy to be able to participate. One backlash of the reimagining of Star Wars expanded universe was the fan-favorite character of Timothy Zahn. Such as Mara Jade and Thrawn ceased to officially exist. Many fans disapproved and let Disney know. However, out of the darkness there was a light. The animated series Star Wars Rebels wanted to bring out the new villain to show personally invited Timothy to meet them into putting Thrawn back in the Star Wars canon as the villain. Timothy was impressed with the respect that was shown of the character, along with Thrawn being put back in the Star Wars universe. Timothy was able to write new novels with the character, this time with classic characters like Darth Vader, the Emperor, and Tarkin interacting with him. Timothy's impact of Star Wars cannot be understated. He was like the transfusion that brought Star Wars back to life support, and in one of the largest marketable movies of all time. What culture had a topic of 8 people who were more important than George Lucas and Star Wars, and Timothy was listed number 7. Timothy Zahn's work will forever be admired by the Star Wars fans, whether they had ever heard of him or not. And now you have. Thank you.